Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to talk about her childhood sexual trauma and mental health issues that led her to a place of despair. However, she's also going to share about the day that literally changed her life and how she now helps others. Please help me in welcoming Charlene Madden. Hi, Charlene. How are you today?
Fantastic. How are you?
I am well. I absolutely love what is going on behind you. And I'm guessing that we'll probably talk a little bit about that as we go along today.
I'm sure we will.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to jump right into it. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Charlene Madden. I live in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. So I am kind of right in the middle of a couple mountain ranges where it's absolutely beautiful. I live on 6 acres with my husband. I kind of have a little hobby farm. So I have some goats, some dogs. I had some chickens, but they're now in my freezer. So, but I'm looking at expanding, maybe doing a little bit of animal rescue in the near future. So I work full time for a mining company, uh, doing accounting work, which for me is kind of boring because I'm not a numbers sit behind a desk kind of girl. But that's where my path has taken me right now. But my real passion is reaching out and connecting with women who have experienced trauma, domestic violence, mental health issues. And I'm very passionate about taking away the stigma that is attached to those areas. And that passion is because of the experiences I've had in my past. And it's something that I've experienced firsthand with my own mental health struggles, as well as having a partner who took their own life. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum of mental health and suicide. So it's definitely something I'm very passionate about talking about. So it's a little bit about me.
So we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff. I want to start by saying I don't like to judge a book by its cover, but I definitely don't see you as the numbers behind the desk type of person.
Mhm.
I will say that, but we end up where we are supposed to be for that period of time, I feel like.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually spent most of my working career in food and beverage. Before I went into the office, I spent 16 years managing a pub. So that was much more my forte and my experience in life. So, and it granted me the opportunity to connect with people, and that's why I enjoyed the job. But it just wasn't where I was supposed to be. So it was exciting to start a new journey because that's what we're constantly doing, is starting new journeys. And didn't feel comfortable in the beginning, which most change doesn't, but uh, it's definitely been an amazing experience. So it's offered me a lot of opportunities. I work for an amazing person who's very much into personal development and growth, and she's a mining company operator, but she's also a certified counselor, coach. So it was great to work and just to be able to sit and talk with her and share experiences has been amazing. So
That's a very interesting juxtaposition that she has going on there, it sounds like.
hmm yeah, I mean, she took over. It was a family business, so she took over her family business, and that working with people, especially being a woman in a male-dominated
Mhm.
industry, it took a lot of um, self-work to develop the confidence and stuff that she needed to operate in that position. So she's done a lot of work, and became passionate about her own personal development, but also giving other people the opportunity to develop their own per, skills and leadership skills. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Nice. Well, let's jump into a little bit of your past and kind of what led you, as you said, to be passionate about helping other women who have been through trauma. Let's start with your own trauma, and I'll let you kind of decide what piece of that you want to start with and want to talk a little bit about.
Yeah. For me, my story starts when I was like, my first memories are when I was about 3 years old. I was the last of four children born into a pretty dysfunctional family. My father was a very violent alcoholic and didn't take it out on my sister and I. My sister is next oldest. She's 4 years older than me. And then I have two twin brothers that are 8 years older than myself, and they're half brothers. So unfortunately, when my father was drunk, he would be physically abusive to my half brothers. And it got to the point where I was about 3.5, where my mom said, I need to take the kids and go because, something bad's going to happen. And my dad said, you can take the boys because they're not mine, but you're not taking my daughters. So my mom had a really difficult choice to make, and she had to choose to protect and my brothers, which I completely understand in that position. My father, being an alcoholic, though, wasn't able to maintain a stable household for two young kids. So he contacted my maternal grandparents and asked if they would take us in. And my grandmother didn't skip a beat, said, absolutely, we will take the girls in. And my grandmother is just, um, she was an amazing woman. She's no longer here, but she was an absolutely amazing woman. But unfortunately, my grandfather was a pedophile. So at the age of 3.5, when we first went to live with them, we started having weekly sexual abuse. And this went on for over 9 years. It came out just after I turned 12. So it was a weekly occurrence because there was only one night a week that my grandmother left the house. And that was when my grandfather took the opportunity to sexually abuse my sister and I. So going through that experience for that amount of time, growing up in a small town, when it came out, um, you have that stigma and that shame because everybody knows,
Mhm.
and it really caused friction in my family with my aunts and uncles, and so it was an extremely difficult time. And I mean, and I'm 12, I'm getting ready to go into high school, so you're already dealing with these emotional struggles. My grandparents separated. They had to, everything was sold. So the house that I grew up in, I've now moved from, and I'm now living in a little low income housing duplex with my grandmother and my sister. And so now I go into high school and I'm dealing with um, not having any counseling when the abuse came out. It was, uh, It was kinda just a more of, "Okay, this happened." My grandfather was, tried, convicted. He spent 6 months in jail, which, that's another thing I'm passionate about is working to change the justice system for sexual abuse victims. Um, so he's gone and moved on after his 6 months. I've gone into high school with no counseling to deal with the trauma that I went through for 9 years, and I start dealing with, depression and mental health issues, and difficult being a teenage girl as it is going into high school. Um, so I choose an outlet for myself, and that's writing, and that was always, my passion, and I always said I poured words out on the page rather than blood out because it was my coping mechanism that I had at the time, was just to write my feelings out on paper. And when you are so raw and you put it out there, of course it draws attention, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl, and you're writing about some seriously dark stuff, and talking about suicide, and wanting to end pain. So of course the teachers, let the school counselor know. The school counselor pulls me in. I have to do this drawn out evaluation, psychological evaluation. And I remember that day, the psychiatrist that was in for the school and saying, honey, I just want you to know you're bipolar and you're manic depressive. Now this is like, I'm 14. I have no idea what that means. No idea what that means. And she's like, but you're going to be okay. And I remember that pat on the back as I walked out of the office, and that was it. That was it. There was no follow-up. There was like a diagnosis, a pat on the back, "You're gonna be okay," and I thought, this has the same flavor of the abuse, right? Like it was a, okay, so you went through all this abuse and trauma, pat on the back, you're going to be okay. And then, okay, so in my mind as a 14-year-old, I'm like, okay, so now I'm a child abuse victim. I am crazy, right? And everybody keeps telling me I'm going to be okay. I don't feel like I'm going to be okay. It's like, why doesn't someone help me? That's all I wanted was someone to help me. And nothing happened. So I had to learn some coping mechanisms. One of them was I started cutting. Um, it was that emotional, the physical release of the pain um, was what I needed at the time. I started drinking heavily at the age of 14 and, maintained that habit for many decades. Um, just trying to cope, just to numb the pain. And I got through high school and I was so excited because all I wanted to do was move. I wanted to get away from where I was because I thought if I moved, everything would be okay. And I think sometimes we have that. We think, oh, if I just get a different job or I just move to a different city, it's all just geography. And so I moved. I moved with my high school sweetheart, and thought everything was going to be great. Moved to the city, got away from the small town. Nobody knew who I was. Couldn't get a job when I moved, and so now I'm struggling. How am I going to pay my bills? Um, And I had an easy career come along, and that was being an exotic dancer. And it seemed to make a lot of sense because at that time I felt the only value I had was my body, right? Like that's the only thing I was good for was for someone to use and abuse me. And I did that career for 6, 7 years. And I unfortunately was married to well, my high school sweetheart and I got married. We had 3 amazing kids. Um, but he was not a stable provider, so I felt the need to always provide, and I think it was really it was my need to control. It was my need to control the circumstances I was in, so that I could protect myself, keep myself safe, because I knew I was the only person that could do that. So I was in this super hyper vigilant state of always being in control, always, worried about what was going to happen, to me, to my children. And it got to the point where it was too much to bear. And I was 28 when I had basically a nervous breakdown. And I knew that I was going to take my life. And I was terrified of my children. I had my 2 oldest were in school. Um, and then I had my young son at home. And I was afraid that my daughters were going to come home and find me dead. I had already, here's how I can do it. And I knew I couldn't stay. I had to go try to fix me. And I made the decision to leave the house, leave my children. And not an easy choice to make by any means because it had such a memory of what had happened to me. And I thought, my mom left me and here I am leaving my kids. It's like I promised I would break this generational cycle and here I was just repeating it. So I left, but I didn't do anything to fix me. I continued drinking. The depression got worse. I had only separated from my husband for a month when I jumped into another relationship because I needed validation. I needed someone to say I was worthy of love, that I was um, important. And so I got into another relationship. And unfortunately, the person I got into a relationship with was probably just as dysfunctional as I was, which was probably not the best thing. Um, but it fit at the time. And I think we just developed this codependent relationship that we were just 2 broken people trying to fix each other instead of fixing ourselves. So um, that relationship continued to deteriorate rather quickly. Domestic violence started, um, and I again sunk deep into depression and to a point where I took an overdose of pills, was writing my suicide letter, like my goodbye letter to my children, and went, oh, I can't leave my kids. And took a cab to the emergency room and remember just sitting at the receptionist desk and saying, hey, I took an overdose of pills. And that's the last thing I remember until I woke up with tubes down my throat. And at that point, of course, it came out to my mom what had happened. And she's like, you need to move. You need to get out of the situation that you're in, move out west. I was in Ontario at the time. And she's like, move out west and we'll support you and the kids, help you get on your feet, whatever you need. And I thought, yeah, great. That's exactly what I'm going to do. But here's where the pattern keeps repeating because all I was doing was just changing a geographical location. I still wasn't doing any work on myself. I was just running away from the problem instead of facing it. So fast forward, now I've moved out to BC. My partner, who I'd been in the dysfunctional relationship with, decided to move out to BC as well. And it just continued. And the relationship finally ended. It was July 1st, which is Canada Day up here, July 1st of 2014. I remember him coming in and saying, I'm leaving, can't do this anymore. And I was just like, I knew it was the best thing, but I was just distraught. I was just like, I can't be alone. I can't be alone with myself. I had my kids, but I still needed validation from another adult saying that I was okay. So he left, moved in with another woman straight away. And so that was a whole nother thing to process. But so that was July 1st. And I remember being at work September 14th and a police officer coming in and asking to speak with me outside. Now I recognized the police officer because he had been involved in a domestic case. And he said, Charlene, I have some news I need to share with you. And I was like, okay. And he's like, your ex-partner, took his own life today. And, like you hear that story of like, it seemed like time stopped. That's exactly how it felt in that moment. And I didn't know what to do. Like, how was I going to, number one, tell my children? Because this man had raised my son from 2. So he was the dad my kids didn't really know. And I think in the back of my mind, I still harbored this delusion that everything would be fine. We would work it all out. And now that was gone. So I threw myself into work because that's what I always did because I just wanted to just keep plugging, that pat on the back, just keep going. Everything's going to be okay. And so I didn't really deal with anything. And I remember 2 weeks after his death getting really angry and talking to a friend and going, I'm so angry about this. And she's like, it's okay. That's one of the stages of grief. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm not mad that he's dead. I'm not mad that he took his own life. I'm mad that he did it first. And, for people to hear that, they're like, what? And I was mad that he did it before I did it because now I was left to see the repercussions of that action. And it's like, so how could I possibly take my life and get out of this miserable thing I'm living after I see all the hurt and the pain and the sorrow that's left behind? How do I do it? And now I'm like, okay, so now I'm just going to have to keep faking my way through life and pretending that I'm happy and pretending I'm okay. And that's what I did for a whole nother year. I was like, all right, let's move on. I mean, I was seeing a psychiatrist at this time. And I remember asking her, and this is probably why I went into coaching, I remember asking her saying, how did you deal with your depression? And she was like, well, I've never been in that position. And I was like, then how can you help other people if you don't know how they're feeling? And she was like, well, we do a lot of studies and work with a lot of people. And I was like, nah, unless you've been in that position, you don't know. So for the next year, I pretended everything was okay until I got to a spot where it wasn't okay. I had been planning um, my departure. I would say is what I call it. I had um, I'd received life insurance money from when my ex partner passed away, so I took that money and I put a down payment on a house. And the purpose of that was when I took my own life, that house would go to my children because it felt like that was the only legacy of value I was going to be able to leave to them. And so, on the outside, everybody's going, "Oh, great, she's moving on with life, she's buying," but we don't know what's going on underneath all, what unless we talk to people. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, I so I got my house at the end of September, and it was close to the end of October was the date that I had set because I knew everything was established, gone through. And I had bought tickets to go to a women's workshop. A coworker of mine was like, "Come with me. I don't want to go by myself." And I was like, "Yeah, okay," because I was always trying to please everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to go to this workshop. And I actually went on the Saturday morning to the workshop, and in the back seat of my car was my hunting rifle. And my plan was I would attend this Saturday and Sunday of the workshop. Then Monday morning, I was going to the same location where my ex had taken his life, and I was going to do the same thing. And, time, place, everything was picked out. I just had to get through that weekend. I walked into that room with all those women who were excited, and I felt it reinforced how fake I felt because, I was always slapping this smile on my face and
Mm-hmm.
pretending that I was okay when I really wasn't. And here I was again, listening to these women planning their futures and setting goals. And I was like, I just need to pretend for 2 more days and then it's all over. The pain stops. And that Saturday, I heard three speakers that changed everything and saved my life. And after that weekend, I gave my hunting rifles away for a while. I was like, let's just, take that out of there till I know I'm okay. But that weekend set me on a path that absolutely changed everything. And it's hard to believe that one event, one speaker's story can have that impact, but it did. I mean, I had three amazing speakers that I talked about, but it was the one gentleman's story that saved my life. And it was that weekend that when I say what happened, I would say, people throw around the word purpose,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what I feel happened. I found my purpose that weekend. And it was like, yeah, I've went through some shit in my life, that I wouldn't wish upon anyone else, but maybe I went through it for a reason. And, I know when people say that, people are like, "Oh my God, I hate that." But I'm like sitting here going, I have two choices. I can continue to let this completely destroy me,
Mm-hmm.
destroy my children's lives, or I can take this and I can use it for good. I can tell people it's okay to talk about being sexually abused as a child, and I mean, at the beginning, I felt awkward because I knew it made my family uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It made my mom uncomfortable. Um, And I just went, "You know what? Like, I've lived in discomfort." And yeah, in the beginning, it wasn't comfortable to talk about because I still felt that shame
Mm-hmm.
and the stigma of going, "Hey, I am that crazy girl. I am the girl that was sexually abused for 9 years, but it's okay. Like, I'll sit in the dark with you because I understand what it feels like to be there." And it's like, I'll sit there in silence with you. I'll sit there and listen to you talk. I'll sit there and, until you're ready to get up and I'll walk out of it with you. And that was what my purpose that weekend. That's what I went, this is what I need to do. I need to just share it, own it, and say, hey, this is my story. If me sharing my story gives you hope that there is something better, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I've done. I took that moment that the universe gave to me, and I said, I remember talking to the organizer of the event and saying, I've, I don't know if you know the impact that this weekend has had on me, but I'd really like to share that with you. And I said, and I'd like to come back next year and I'd like to talk at your event. And she's like, okay, we'll interview, we'll do an interview. And I interviewed, and she brought me back to talk about that experience. And I remember saying at the end of my talk, it's like, if I could save just one person by sharing my story, then it makes decades of crap that I have gone through all worth it. And I remember after I got off the stage, a woman approached me and she said, you know how you wanted to save a life today? You did. And she turned and walked away. And I was just like, I get goosebumps every time I tell that story, because it's so, it meant so much to me in that moment. So, and now I just continue to do that. I mean, now I'm like, all right, let's, ripples. I hosted an event last year live, and that's what I said. Like, we all create ripples in a pond, and your ripples don't have to be huge to have impact, um, because ripples will reach out. And so that, for me, like, I'm just a pebble in a pond. I'm just trying to create ripples to reach as many people to say, hey, it's okay. If you've gone through this shit, it's okay. If you're hurting, it's okay. Because there is light at that end of the tunnel. Sometimes that tunnel is really long and you can't see it, but it is there. So that's kind of my jam now. So, and talking about my backdrop. So I started um, hosting my own workshops. The woman who had been hosting the workshops, she kind of put them on hold. She was, working a full-time job, and she was kind of burnt out from doing them. And I said, I know the impact these events can have. So it's time to step up and fill those shoes. So I hosted my first live event last year. This year I did it virtually, right? Because we couldn't all be together, but I had a virtual event this year in November. So it's just being able to provide a platform for other women is just, it's amazing. So
There's a lot there to go through.
mm-hmm.
I'm going to start with what I think is the easiest thing. So the person that came to you at the end of your talk and said you wanted to save a life, and you have, did you ever have the opportunity to speak with any of the speakers, but particularly the one gentleman you said had the biggest impact on you, to tell them that they had also saved a life?
I have actually not had the opportunity to speak to him in person, but I have. I know he knows, because we've got some speaker friends in the same community. So I know that he knows, and I'm hoping that I'm going to get the opportunity to speak to him in person. I actually did have one of the three speakers that impacted me. I had her as a speaker at my first live event. So it was great to pay homage. And actually, I had the lady who organized that event. She was my very first speaker at the live event. So it was my way of saying, thank you for putting the platform together, because had she not, had that event not happened, I wouldn't be here. So,
And as we discussed earlier, everything happens for a reason, and you end up in the right place, even if you don't necessarily know it, for a particular purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, I had zero expectations of anything positive coming out of that. I went because, number one, I'm cheap and I bought a ticket. So that's just how I roll.
I gotta go now.
Yeah. And I went because, I had always wanted to be there for other people. Right. So, here this coworker was like, I really don't want to go by myself. I really want you to go. So I still felt this need to, even on my way out, was trying to support someone else, another woman. So I have much gratitude to that woman as well. And she definitely knows how much I appreciate her pressuring me to go. So
I want to ask you a little bit about that, because, I have gone through some similar things to what you have gone through in your past. And I too spent many years with that feeling of wanting, needing, having to make other people happy, even at the detriment of myself. But I really, wanted to make sure that other people got what they wanted, got what they needed, were happy. Why do you think we do that?
I can only speak, I always just speak of from my own experience. And I know for me, feeling um, feeling abandoned from by my mom, as the child, feeling abandoned by my dad, um, feeling really emotionally abandoned by my grandfather. Um, I felt this need. It was just this constant need for validation. I just felt that I needed to prove my worth in this world, and by doing that, I would secure. Um, I would People wouldn't leave me, right? If I was pleasing
Mhm.
people, they would love me, they would stay. I even, like, I looked at it in my first marriage as well, like being the breadwinner, the main supporter, the worker. I felt that that secured me the loyalty of my husband.
Mhm.
you know like, as long as he depended on me, he wasn't ever going to leave me because he needed me. Maybe he didn't want me, but he needed me.
Right.
And I think that's, for myself, I was just in this constant state of needing the validation because I wanted to be wanted so bad, because I needed my validation was all external. I just relied on other people to determine my worth instead of determining my own worth. And that's where, for myself, everything changed, was when I shifted from needing the external validation to going, you know what, it's okay. And that was my major shift for that event, was when I went, it's okay if you're alone, because my two daughters had moved out. My son was on the verge of moving. So I knew I was going to be alone.
Mhm.
And I was terrified to be alone with this person, right? Because I didn't like this person, and I got to the point where I went, it's okay. I love me, and that's all that matters. I'm alone for the rest of my life. I'm okay with that because I'm enough. And it was not just saying it, but feeling the shift inside that created a complete change, because then it changed what I was willing to tolerate in my life
Mhm.
and what I wasn't willing to tolerate. Because if you love yourself enough, you're not going to tolerate toxic people in your life. You're not going to tolerate toxic circumstances and behaviors. You're gonna level up, and that's what I did. So yeah, I think a lot of us are just looking for that external validation. We need that feelings of worth. We want
Mhm.
people to, like us. If we're doing stuff for other people constantly, they're going to need us, or they're going to want us in their lives, and maybe not for the right reasons, but because we're doing what we feel is of value. So, and it all shifts depending on who you're interacting with too,
Mhm.
right? Because you'll do, certain things for certain people and certain things for certain people. And it was interesting to step back and look at my own life and see how I was in relation with different people. So,
That shift that you talked about of needing the external validation to moving to a place of understanding that you could determine your own worth and how valuable you are. When you talk about it, it sounds like it was like a light switch. For most people, it is a journey or a path of
mhm.
saying, okay, I feel this way, but it's a work in progress. Will you talk a little bit about, was it really like a light switch for you? And what did that feel like?
The first speaker that I saw that made the difference for me, her name is Vanessa McWilliams, and she is a woman who has alopecia, so she has no hair. And she stood up on this stage, and she was confident, and she talked about self-love. She talked about, the struggles that she had gone through her life dealing with having alopecia and all the issues, emotionally, that brings. And she said, but the first thing that changed for her was when she started to love and accept herself. That's what changed. And she was like, I really love myself. And I remember hearing in the back of my mind this little, well, what about you? And I remember thinking, if this woman who has every reason to feel insecure and self-conscious, if she can love herself, why can't you? like when she was hitting rock bottom, she still learned to love herself. And I thought, why can't you? And when I had the next speaker come up and she spoke about living with mental health issues and struggles and how she learned to just, this was part of her life. She, instead of wanting it to go away, she accepted that this is me. And she learned to accept that part of her and love that part of her. And again, I heard that little voice in the back of my mind going, what about you? Because it seemed like these speakers were talking to me. I didn't love myself. You know, I was, fighting this mental illness, not actively. I was
Mhm.
just a passive person in the relationship with the mental illness. But I realized, here are women who have gone through, similar circumstances, and they're, taking they're loving themselves enough, but also sharing that love to other people. I mean, as a child, I always wanted to be Um, I wanted to be a journalist as a child. Like that was what my passion was. I loved to write and I wanted to go out and share other people's stories because I wanted to give voice to the voiceless because that's how I had always felt. I felt like I didn't have a voice. I couldn't stand up and talk about the abuse when it was going on. It had been so stifled. I wasn't talking about the mental health issues. It again was so stifled. So I wanted to give I didn't want anybody to ever experience what I was. I wanted people to have the opportunity to share their stories, express their pains and sorrows, and to see those women actively on the stage sharing that. It was like it activated that little part, that little child in me that was like, this is it. This is what we've been wanting our entire lives. And yeah, it was that moment. And then hearing the last speaker, who was a gentleman, Jared Morrison was his name, talking about being on the verge of, he had basically been suicidal, depressed, addicted to medication, alcohol, and had been trying to find the right concoction to mix together to take his life so that it looked like an accidental overdose instead of suicide. And he had not had custody of his children, and it was one night where he actually was allowed to have his kids for a sleepover, and it was that night that he found that perfect concoction, and he was slowly slipping away and overdosing as his children were sleeping in the apartment with them, and he heard that little voice that said, "No, not today, not like this," and he reached out and got help, and now he was out there sharing his story, and I so related to that, to his story, and it just completely connected with me because I'm thinking that I experienced that. No, not like this when I ended up in the hospital with my overdose. So it was yeah, it was after hearing those three stories one after another, it was just like that little voice, it started out so softly, like, "Hey, what about you?" And the next one was a little louder. And then by that third person, it was like, "Hey, like, what about you?" It was like, if it was the universe
Screaming at you.
smacking you upside the head, it's like, what else do I got to show
Mhm.
you?
Mhm.
Like this is your message, plain and clear. So yeah, it strangely enough, that was my light bulb moment, and it was right there. I went, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living like this, and it's a choice. So I'm either going to choose to live or I'm going to choose not to. But whatever I choose now is the choice I'm sticking with, and I choose life. So that was the best choice I made.
What kind of things did you do after that to assist you in holding that choice? So did you resume therapy, or what additional things did you do to keep you on that path of wellness and being better?
I'm a huge advocate for therapy and medication. I'm going to be honest, I'm not doing either of those.
Good for you.
I chose to completely submerge myself in anything I could find that could improve myself. I threw myself into reading any books I could find, attending any workshops, teachings. I started taking cognitive behavior therapy and neuro-linguistic programming teachings online because I knew I had to shift my story. That was,
Mhm.
the big thing for me. I had to change the story that I was telling myself because
Mhm.
until I did that, I was going to keep repeating the same pattern. Another thing for me was and it was so simple. Um, our the MC at the event did a little thing where he called it the roll the dice on fear. And he said, I want you to write 6 things down that make you uncomfortable or you're afraid of. And he goes, 1 to 6, write them down. And I'm like, all right, write them down. And mine were silly little things. It was like speaking in public, like sharing my story in public, asking someone out on a date because I was terrified of the rejection, heights, um, talking about wanting to run my own business. I can't remember. I know one of them was getting a pedicure, which is, I know everybody laughs when I say that. And I'm like, of everything that I wrote on the list, getting the pedicure is still the one I have not done, which is, I find that strange that, I parachuted, I jumped out of a
Mhm.
plane. I was like, all right, well, you're scared of flying in heights. What are we going to do? We're
Mhm.
going to jump out of a plane. Check that number off there. I asked someone out on a date, and one of them was publish my book of poetry. I had this book of poetry that I'd written, but I was afraid to publish it because it was so raw and vulnerable. And I published that book of poetry, and to have a photo session, right? Have my
Mhm.
picture taken because I hated having my picture taken, right? Because I didn't, I was always the person that didn't want to be in the spotlight because as a child going through sexual abuse, you really try to make yourself small.
Mhm.
And so I didn't like being the person that was out there and in front. And I laughed because I started getting tattoos because I thought if I got tattoos, it would make me look tough and people would leave me alone, right? I got it as a protective thing. It's like no one will approach me, people will just stay away, leave me alone. That's exactly what I want. And, it kinda has the reverse effect because it draws attention, right? "Oh, where'd you get that?" Right? Um, so I did, I was doing all these things, and each time I conquered a fear, it kinda, because we spend our lives being so afraid of things that most of the time our mind's making up, it's not real.
Mhm.
And so by doing each thing and going, "Hey," even if it didn't work out, it was not as bad as my mind had created it to be. Right? So for me, conquering that list of fears was huge. And like asking the guy out on the date, like that was huge for me, because I'd gone, like, I'm finally at a place where I'm okay being alone. I don't
Mhm.
need someone else in my life. Do I want to even bring anybody else in my
Mhm.
life? I don't know. And then I was like, hey, well, it's a date. It doesn't mean it's forever. So I asked this person out on the date. And I remember our first date was December 2nd. And that next August, we got married. So it was just this, and I always said, and my husband's an absolutely incredible man. And I was like, and we've talked, and I always said, the universe waited to bring me the person that I deserved until I believed I deserved that. And it
Mhm.
was when I loved myself that I went, okay, so what am I willing to tolerate in a relationship? And as soon as I had those boundaries, the person came into my life. So I think when we start setting healthy boundaries, but you have to do the work. Like, I 100% committed myself to doing the work to, if I need to go to therapy, I have the number to go.
Mhm.
I have the help numbers on my bedside table. Like I've set myself up number one for success in, I know what is available to me. I'm not afraid to ask for help. And I think that was the first thing was being able to say, I have a problem. Hi, my name is
Mhm.
Charlene and I'm a depressive, like, people go to AA. So I'm like, hey, my name is Charlene and I'm crazy, but it's okay. Um, and understanding that, if someone comes and says, I'm a diabetic, I need insulin, we don't judge them,
Mhm.
right? If I say I have mental illness and I need medication, I'm judged for that. And it's really the same thing, right? Like yes, there are situations where it's a lot of mental health is trauma based, but there is a lot of, chemical causes and reactions in our body that contribute to it. Like my serotonin levels are right, and I understand that I have to work on that. So I do things and activities that, create higher serotonin levels. And, like I exercise regularly. I have animals around me all the time that create this constant, environment of happiness and joy in my life. So it's yeah, I mean, if you need, I mean, and it's so individualized. That's why I don't like to, I mean, the people I
Mhm.
work with and I coach, I mean, I don't believe in blanket treatment for anything,
Mhm.
because I think everybody's situation and circumstances are different. So what works for one person is not going to work for someone else. I mean, I'm even when I was
Mhm.
younger and was on medication, I was switching my medication every month because, they're like, you got to find that perfect cocktail, right? So understanding that, it's the same for treatment and personal work. It's like you've got to find what works for you, but you have to actively search for it. So
Mhm.
that was me, just doing a lot of self work and reaching out and creating a community of others, right? I think that's so important, is being able to reach out and say, here's what I'm experiencing. And it's a lot easier for women. Um,
Mhm.
it's so tough for men, so knowing, my ex-partner passing away, no one knew that he suffered from mental illness. I mean, I knew, but none of his family knew, none of his friends knew. um, and that saddens me. Men's mental health is that makes me sad, because they have so many um, issues that they're afraid to talk about. So I just think talking openly about it, even our own experiences, sometimes opens a door for someone else to speak. So
I agree. And I will tell you, I feel like at least for some it's getting better. And I'm saying that just based on some of the guests that I've had on this podcast, men who are struggling with or have struggled with trauma, PTSD, other mental health issues. And it does give me hope because they have been able to reach out for help. And some of them, are kind of doing what you're doing, but for men, in letting them know that it is okay as well.
mm,
I want to step back for a second to the pedicure because there's a reason why I was laughing. And it wasn't, I mean, it was funny, but it was especially funny to me because I also refuse to get pedicures. My reason is because I do not have big toenails
mm,
anymore.
mhm,
I had to get them taken off because I was a runner and some other things. And so they were ingrown constantly.
mm,
So I got them yanked out. And so now I am embarrassed. And so I will slop paint on my toes myself at home. And I feel like if anybody gets close enough to my feet to realize that it's just kind of slopped on there and there's no nail, like there's other problems because they are way too close to my feet. But I thought it was funny when you said that because I relate to it 100%. So maybe we need to go pedicure together,
there we go.
perhaps.
Yes, I'll I'll come down to Colorado. We can get a pedicure. I
Perfect.
know, but isn't it funny that we're still
Yes.
judgment? Like, I mean, you're still that judge. Like I'll get up and and it's. I'm going to be honest with you. This is the first podcast that I've done where I've talked about actually being a dancer. That was um, it's still as much work as I've done. It was still a stigma that I had, because I thought people
Mhm.
will judge that more than they will with me having mental illness, right? So I was like, but as I, again, as you continue to grow, you're like, hey, it's part
Mhm.
of my story, and it's a
Yeah.
huge part of it, right? Because that's where I, continued on with what I felt was my value
Mhm.
in the world. But I'm like, I'll share that, but I won't let someone see my feet,
Right.
right? Like, you're going, what is wrong with that? So every year I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm going to get a pedicure. I'm like, that's it, 2021. Now I'm like, going, yeah, it's not happening in 2020, 2022. Big things coming, pedicure.
That's our pedicure
That's
year,
it. That's the year it's
2022.
going. I keep going, I wish someone would just buy me a pedicure for Christmas, right? Because then it's like I would have to go because I
Right.
oh my
Because
gosh,
of your right.
that's
You'd
right.
have to
That
do
means
it.
that it's like I would have to go now. So Hopefully my husband sees this.
It's right. I'm gonna make sure I get in touch with him. And I've even had friends who do manicures and pedicures, and I wouldn't want them to do it anyway, but who tell me, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. Like we see stuff like that all the time. And I'm like, okay, nope, not gonna do it.
Yeah.
So maybe 2022
Yeah. I'm
will
thinking like I
be
need to go to a city where I don't know anybody
right.
and I'll never have to see these people again. So if they are judging my feet, I'm never going
Right.
to know.
I like this idea. Okay. I'm in
Okay.
2022. Let's
Awesome.
get pedicures.
Okay.
Perfect.
Done.
Let's talk a little bit about the relationships that you have with your family now, if any, or are those some of the boundaries that you had to set for your own well-being?
Mm. Well, like I said, my grandmother's passed away. So has my grandfather. They
Mm-hmm.
have both passed. Moving from Ontario out to BC, I left kind of all my aunts and uncles and cousins, which I was really close with
Mm-hmm.
growing up. So they're all kind of there, but we still are, we're all in contact. My father has passed away as well. So, and I unfortunately didn't really get to develop a relationship with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
which that's probably the one I'm the saddest about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but my mom and I do have a relationship, and it's probably the best relationship we've ever had. And I think part of that is because of the work I've done and being able to have open, honest, and authentic conversation with her and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. Instead of just acting out on how I was feeling, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually being able to sit down and put words to it and say, here's how I felt, you know, and I don't need you to respond. I don't need you to defend yourself. I just need you to listen. Right. Because that's all I needed as a child was I just needed to be heard. So being able to identify that and go, you know what, it's okay. I need to give that little inner child a voice. And my mom has been amazing with being able to sit down now. My mom also experienced sexual abuse at the hands of my grandfather. He raped and abused her for most of her life.
Mm-hmm.
So that caused a huge issue for me, knowing that she let us live with him,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that that behavior had gone on, and knowing that even after it came out, she still had a relationship with him. That was probably my biggest struggle. But also understanding like my mom hadn't done the work then either. Right. And understanding, being able to step back and look at it from a mile high view now and really like detach myself from the situation and look at all of the relationships, how difficult it must have been for my grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
because my grandmother knew that my mother had been abused. So how difficult it was for my grandmother knowing that this abuse was going on and that her husband was choosing his daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, how hard it was for my aunts and uncles knowing that this was going on, and the man that they loved was also the man that had done this. My mom having that torn loyalties towards, the man who was her
Mm-hmm.
father, but also the man that was the predator. So being able to step back and look at those relationships from a different viewpoint was huge, and it gave me the ability to show grace to my mom and say, because I remember as a parent, I didn't do a great job, because I wasn't okay. Right. So, um, knowing that my mom really had done the same thing that I had done, she just did the best she could with what she had to cope with. And I think being able to see it from that point of view um, gave me a little more grace and ability to forgive and have the open, non-judgmental conversations. And my mom came to my first live event that I hosted, and I was really worried because I thought she's going to be in the room and I'm going to be talking about everything. Like, is
Mm-hmm.
she going to be embarrassed? Is she going to feel judgment? And at the end of the event, her coming up and saying, I'm really proud of you. And I was like, thanks. And I thought it had a different flavor with me though, because it would before that would have been like, oh,
Mhm,
yes,
mhm,
right? Like that's the validation I need. And I thought, I'm happy that she's proud of me, but I don't need her to be proud of me. And it felt so good when I walked away and I went, I'm happy that she's happy for me and that she's proud of me. But it no longer determines my sense of self-worth.
mhm.
And that was huge. It was like I thought, so many light bulb moments that you have, right? And I was like, that was another one. I thought, what a moment that is where I don't need that validation from, that person that I think is supposed to love me. It's like if she doesn't love me, that's okay. If she's not proud of me, that's okay. So yeah,
How liberating is that?
huge, huge. Yeah.
I know that you said earlier that you don't like to do blanket treatments or ideas or things like that because we are all different. But I'm going to ask you a couple questions
Uh-huh.
about just some things that people can do or think about when it comes to relationships and wellness. So, if you could give out just one piece of wellness advice, what would that be?
Hmm. I would say start looking at the stories that you're telling yourself. I'm not huge with journaling. I was actually just talking to my boss about this. Um, I think I attach my depression to writing. So when I start journaling, I think that I'm supposed to. My mind goes, "Oh, are we in that state again?" And I'm like, "No, we're not."
Mm,
So, but I really encourage the people I work with to journal,
mhm,
to write down and just flow, because there's a lot of things that we have inside of us that we don't feel comfortable saying, and sometimes putting them down on paper is your first step to starting to see the patterns of thoughts that you're carrying. Because once you can start seeing the patterns of thoughts that you have, you can see how those thoughts are affecting your life. Like if it's the constant needing the validation from someone else or not getting the recognition or whatever you're finding is your consistent pattern that you're writing down, that's where you can start working on. And it's really learning to shift your belief patterns, because that's where all change comes from, is when you can start to shift those patterns that you've been holding and recognizing that this isn't what you believe, this is what you've been taught to believe. Because most of the time all we're doing is carrying the generational shit that's been piled on us, and
mhm,
it's being able to put that down and go, okay, do I really believe this? And that's the one thing, working with actually a marriage counselor, my husband and I, having her ask that question. It's like, do you really believe this is true? Or is it just a belief that you carry? And going, oh, that's such a great question, right? It's like, because
mhm,
most of the time, do you really believe it's true? It's like, when I tell myself I'm never going to be successful, no one's ever going to want me, all these things I was telling myself, stopping myself and going, well, is that really true?
mhm,
And it's like, well, no, I have a huge network of friends and people that want me in their lives. So obviously that's not true. And I always equate it when I work with people. It's, like our beliefs are like table legs, right? So you've got these table legs that are supporting this belief that you have. So you need to knock out those table legs and put new table legs in, right? So shifting your beliefs. And for me, it starts with identifying what those beliefs are, because you can't fix what you don't know is where the issue is. So figuring out what you're thinking is your first
mhm.
step into changing what you're thinking. So,
What about relationship advice or thoughts? What would you throw out to people? I think I have an idea of what it might be, but what would you say to people generally that they could do in a relationship?
put yourself first. And I know that sounds really selfish, especially for women, because we're taught to put everybody else's needs before ours, especially as mothers, right? That's what you do. You come last. But, everybody hears that adage. I know it's every speaker I've ever heard,
Mm,
talking about putting that oxygen mask on
right.
yourself, right? Like you have to put yourself first. And that doesn't mean that the other person's needs aren't important, but you need to look after yourself first. because if you're not okay, then you can't be okay for anybody else. Um, so yeah, putting your relationship with yourself, I mean, that's ultimately the most important relationship that you're ever going to have, is the relationship that you have with yourself, because it's the relationship you're in 24 hours a day.
Hmm.
Other relationships may come and go, but you're in relation with yourself 24 hours a day. So you need to make sure that that relationship is a healthy one. If I had to say anything else about relationships, cut the toxic out of your life. I
Hmm.
have cut so many people out of my life over the last 4 years, and it's been in-laws. It's been, um, if you're going to bring toxicity into my life, then you need to go, because that doesn't fit with my health and well-being plan that I have for myself. And that again comes with putting myself first, my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health. It's the most important.
I'm so glad that you said that. And that's kind of what I thought you might say, because I do think a lot of times we keep those toxic people around, especially if they are family or in-laws or people that we think we have to keep around, and it really just makes us suffer. So I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, and that's all. Like, um, you're not obligated to have relation with anybody, other than yourself. I mean, and it's gonna sound, my relationship with my children. I struggle that because my kids didn't see me being a healthy mom. They saw me in constant states of either addiction, whether it was addiction to relationships, addictions to alcohol. That's, what they saw. And so my relationships are have struggled. My oldest daughter actually suffers from some mental illness of her own. And I remember coming to a point where every time we talked, we fought. And I had to I had to make a decision, and I said, "You know what? I don't think we can have relationship, right? Because this is not how I want this relationship to be, and it's not it's not healthy for either of us. And if I have to walk away from that relationship, and I mean, talk about walking away from your kids, that's the hardest relationship you could ever
Hmm.
walk away from. I was willing to do that for both of us.
Hmm.
And luckily, by her seeing my personal growth, it created patterns of personal growth for her as well. And she's absolutely grown into I mean, she's going to be 28 on December 24th. And she's just grown into the most amazing young woman that I know. Like, I mean, she's now out there. I saw a shift in social media posts. Like, I mean, she
Hmm.
is like all about positivity. And I actually had her on my workshop in November. I had her come on and do a little 5-minute meditation. She started her own podcast where she does like little, short blurbs and meditations and stuff like that. So, being able to see that my growth may have been a catalyst for her growth, and watching it strengthen the relationship, but being able to step away from that relationship, even though it was painful,
Hmm.
it was something that needed to be done at the time. So yeah, it's not easy walking away, and sometimes you're going to even experience judgment because you're choosing to walk away from those relationships, and you just have to understand that you got to do what's good for you at the end of the day. So
We have talked about some very intense topics. We are going to close out with something a little bit less intense, much more fun for me. As I told you earlier, I love tattoos. I have a bunch of tattoos. You just can't see them today. I have my next tattoo scheduled. I don't know exactly what I'm going to get, but I have it scheduled. You obviously have tattoos because we can see them, and you also talked about them earlier.
Mhm.
So I would love to hear, what is your favorite and or most meaningful tattoo that you have?
Hmm. Jeez, that's a tough one. I'm, oh, jeez. I
This is the
would
hardest
say
question of the day, right?
that is. I'm like, oh, um, because they all, some of them are just. you just get them done and they don't have any personal meaning. I'm actually having my back piece is 3/4 done right now, and it's kind of mixing an old tattoo I had with a new tattoo, and the new tattoo is a phoenix because
Mm-hmm.
for me that has, as you can see, like my logo for my
Mm-hmm.
workshop is a phoenix. So for me, that kind of epitomizes my journey with what I've gone through. Like I've felt like I have burned to the ground emotionally and spiritually. And over the last 4 years, I've just risen from the ashes of all that shit. And I'm now creating a life that I am passionate about. And I'm taking that light and I'm shining it out into the world. So for me, that probably represents my life's journey the most. So.
And is that your first Phoenix tattoo? Will that be?
Mm-hmm. It is.
Right on.
Yeah. Yeah, most of my other stuff, people collect, people go on holidays and they'll collect a T-shirt, or I collect tattoos when I travel. So, I've got Mexico and Costa Rica
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So I like to kind of take art from different places. But I love Japanese style
Mhm.
art. So most of my arms are and my legs are Japanese art and stuff like that. So, and then my little pieces here and there that dot.
Mhm.
So but yeah, but my phoenix is probably because it represents my journey through life, I think, the most. So.
I love that. I have a Phoenix as well. So I completely understand and respect the importance of that type of piece. Do you have anything else planned going forward?
We're not talking tattoos, we're talking life, right?
Well, okay. Tattoos and life. I'm
Well,
sure you have lots of life stuff planned going
yeah.
forward.
Yeah, well, like I said, I want to finish my back piece, which is I'm probably another 4 hours away from getting it finished. So, and then it's just whatever kind of moves me. We have a local tattoo artist who does uh she does an event every March where she donates the proceeds to a dog rescue. So, and
Nice.
that's animal rescue is huge,
Mhm.
passion of mine. So I always like to go get a little piece just to kind of support that. So, but it's just always my husband says no more, but we'll see. We'll
Eh.
see what I feel like. So he's like, "You're running out of skin." I'm like, "I got lots." So
Does he have tattoos?
he's got, like, a really small old one that you can't really tell what it is. I
Right.
keep saying to him, it's like, "We should get that redone." He's like, "Nope, that's the one and only I'm getting." I'm like, "Alright, that's okay." But, I mean, our anniversary was in August, and, he got me a $500 gift certificate for the tattoo shop, so,
There you
you know,
go.
he knows me and he loves me well, so
That's a good man. And I also appreciate the animal rescue support that you give because I would go get a tattoo for that
yeah,
as well.
absolutely, yeah.
Well, let's talk about life. What is next for Charlene?
Um, I'm just I'm doing right now podcasts. I host my event every November. So right now it's just once a year. That kind of gives me enough time to get out there and find some speakers that are going to be, create some impact. I do one-on-one coaching as well. I'm a Reiki practitioner. I started getting interested in Reiki because I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia over 10
Mhm.
years ago. So I've started to my boss, my new boss, had sent me away to a 5-day retreat, um, and it's called the Haven. It's out on Gabriola Island. It's absolutely amazing. If anybody's looking to go on a retreat that will change your life, check out the
Mhm.
Haven. Absolutely amazing. So it kind of started me focusing more on breathing and energy work. And so I realized by doing some energy work, I was able to release a lot of the tension and pain that I was holding in my body. So I kind of became, hey, I want to share this with other people,
Mhm.
right? So I do my Reiki practice, I do my one-on-one coaching. I'm going to be launching a group coaching program in 2022. That's something that I'm working on right now. I'm hoping to have it launched by February. I'm working on a book. I'm writing a book about my life story, so it's been busy, and I'm also kind of in the back. ground working on, I want to start, because I live on 6 acres. I want to start an animal rescue and
Mhm.
trauma healing center for women and children. That's something for me. I grew up having a dog, and that was probably my most stable relationship as a child.
Mhm.
Just that comfort from that animal and being able to talk and say things to the animal. I love equine work, so it's I know the power that animals and humans and the healing that can happen with those. So that's another thing that's on my radar in the next couple of years, is to get that set up and going. So it's just to help heal, get out there and heal people as much as I can. So, and sharing my story is a great way to do that. So,
You are definitely staying busy, that's for sure.
mhm.
So where can people find you if they have connected with you, if they wanna know more about you and want to maybe participate in your coaching, looking to your group coaching, maybe get a pedicure together? Where can people find you?
Um, I'm mostly active on Facebook. So my site, Ignite Your Life, is my where I do most of my posting. That's a great way to connect with me. It's where I do most of my promotion for my workshop. I do have a website, Ascension Wellness Studio. So that's where you can book the coaching, any Reiki treatments, whether it's, of course, if you're in my area, you can
Mhm.
come and do them live in person, or distance Reiki healing. And yeah, so that's where I'll be doing my coaching program. Will be available on that website as well. So I am on Instagram. I'm not, not a social media guru by any means. So I'm like, yeah, you may see the odd thing on there, but I am mostly active on Facebook and stuff like that. So
Perfect. And now you can click that little button where it'll just post on Instagram automatically for you.
I'm trying to figure that out.
Mhm, mhm.
I was
We can
actually
talk
looking
about
at it
that.
yesterday because I do all my promotions and I do all my posts and have them all planned out. I'm like, "I
Yep.
get
Yeah, we'll talk about that offline. Well,
it."
Charlene, thank you so much for sharing. I truly appreciate you. I would love to have you back because I feel like there's so much more that we could dig into, but I appreciate everything that you're doing and your willingness to share with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for providing this platform. Thank you for, giving opportunity for people to speak, to share, and for others to hear their stories. And hopefully that's the catalyst for change for them. So I'm grateful for you.
Thank you. I really hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Charlene as much as I did. I truly appreciate her willingness to share so much of her life story and to tell us what she's doing now to help others. So remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it.